As an Imperial Marine, Miara Dasari had been to some exotic places in her time. There were deployments she wanted to forget, but good times she'd never let go of. Along the way, she crawled through her share of pubs, inns, watering holes and strip clubs with her pod. She'd seen and done things she'd never tell her co-wives about, much less Brelak. Of course she'd heard of the tide pool. Who hadn't? It was the gold standard, and word got around where all the best places were. Still, the prices here. Damn. This had always been considered one of those distant places out on the horizon. Officer country, inhabited by the women with gold on their breastplates and interior nobles. Not somewhere she'd expected to be. But oh fuck, I'm glad I am. You couldn't not look. If she'd been 15 years younger, saying no here would have been a feat of mythic proportions. From the moment you stepped into the foyer, it was all there, right on the menu, in glorious holographic display. And the tire pool put the graphic in holographic. That was certain. This was Phrysis' big night out for the girls, and they couldn't really afford to go too crazy, but what the deeps. Nixie had nearly fainted at the cost of a 6th floor reservation, but she had Phrysis' back on this one. It was one night out. The place was supposed to have amazing food, and a floor show like nothing else. No, they couldn't toss credits and gemstones around like duchesses, but for all her occasional foibles, Phrysis was right. They'd made it. Not by normal standards, but even so. Earth was practically mythical. A diamond in the rough. The sex planet. They'd moved halfway across the galaxy to find red zones with a mortality rate that could make a recruitment officer choke. But they made a home and raised a family. She'd had her son there. Against her initial misgivings, they made real friends with humans. With a wary eye, she'd watched most of the red zones fade away. They'd prospered and survived every family crisis along the way. So for one night? Damn right they deserved to celebrate. It felt right they brought Jennifer along. Glancing over at the matriarch of the McClendon family, she tried not to grin. It had taken a while to get to know her, but after Largos was born, and the hormones stopped making her a raving basket case, they'd become real friends. Jen just powered through the foyer, shaking her head and giggling with Shalea Pelavon. Jen would have made a great Marine. Miara snorted. That would have been a riot. Jennifer McClendon was strong like a mountain. She was quiet, but Miara had never seen Jen back down from anything. Beautiful, wonderful, inverted, upside down and inside out. Just like her home planet. What a world. More men than their women knew what to do with. You wouldn't think so many of them would be such prudes. Jen wasn't like that, and tonight was going to be fun. Miara cast an eye over the women she didn't know. That was a different matter of Pluva. Shalea Pelavon had a wiry sense of humour, and her co-blipabrine, Miver, was nice. A proper dame, but she enjoyed a good laugh too. It was their fiancé, Solani, that rang all her alarms. She'd been a Marine. She knew that life, knew the people, knew what she was seeing too. Nice gal, but the things she talked about and the things she didn't? Most deployments had a detachment of death's heads. They were the women you did not screw with, and the ones you learned to recognize when they were working out or in the mess hall. It was the way they moved. Nice as she was, Solani Tonis was 7'5" of quiet lethality. Fuck, if I met her in a dark alley, I'd run. Marine on sick leave, my sweet blue ass. Still, what the deeps. It was Solani's lie to tell, and after trying to compare notes, Miara took the hint and let it be. This was a girl's night out, and that was enough. Goddess, she remembered one night out in the town with her pod. She'd been married to Brelak for 2 years, but you went where you were deployed, and Ossian too had been interesting. It was garrison duty, and there were always clubs. One of the men, well, after sitting on her lap and teasing her from the stage, it was lucky she'd gotten out of there. She'd shown Brelak a lot of attention when that tour was over. Sweet goddess, I nearly broke him that first night. Fortunately, she had been old enough to know when to leave. There'd been a time when even a pale copy of the typehole would have floored her. Those years before you turned 20 or so, when looking experienced in front of your podmates was all that mattered, and you were all scared shitless of looking foolish in front of each other. Or worse, a boy. Not that sex wasn't important. Who in the deeps wanted to go through life abstinent? But the fear behind the question was, who wanted to go through life alone? The answer to both was, no one. But when you were young, it was too damned easy confusing the one with the other. Goddess, that was why they quietly forced Solana to babysit. The girl needed to call her engines. Not that the evening hadn't started with a surprise. After checking in, the maître, a real cutie too, assured Francis that yes, their reservation had been upgraded due to a cancellation, with the compliments of the management. Her co even managed to carry it off gracefully, before being told there was no extra charge, which was just as well. When they got to their table, Nixie and Akatai stood gawking at the view over the theatre. And, oh, what a view it was. Maver and Shalea were giggling about wedding nights and making interesting hand gestures. Francis was taking it all in like she owned the place. But the real fun? Maver cocked an ear to the girls in the group. Sure, there were women now, but there it was. 5 young women trying to look like they knew it all. Trixis was prattling on about her husband to Riala, and trying to feign indifference. Been there, done that. I see you looking, kid. Riala was trying to look at everything at once without being obvious. Her tits are probably hard as rocks under that jacket. As for the other two? This is so weird. I mean... Glued to Riala's side, Melody was blushing bright red and trying to look anywhere but at Jennifer. This is just so weird, isn't it? Riala's snort made Miara proud. Oh, it's plenty weird, but come on, this is so hot. As for Hannah, she looked at Melody and rolled her eyes. I need the restroom. Just send out a Sherpa or something if I'm not back in half an hour. Getting out of bed has seemed like a festival of suck. At the time, Liam had thought powering through the 6-hour time difference would be a good idea, but hindsight lent him perfect 20/20 vision. He set an alarm on his Omnipad, rolled out of bed with enough time to clean up, shave, and try to not look like one of the Walking Dead. He felt like one, but the only thing for that was tea. Hot. He stayed awake well into the night, unable to sleep, and his body paid the price. Still, he'd made it downstairs to the kitchen by 8 AM local, ready to meet Belder and Pris, and maybe get an introduction to the family he'd remember better. Last night there had been hugs for Belle, bump fists, and a lot of names, but everyone had turned in shortly after making it back to the ranch. The one figure he did remember was Belle's uncle, Kelra. The kitchen had been a beehive of activity when he walked in. 2 Rakiri and 4 other Shilvanti guys were bustling around the kitchen, cooking or cleaning up. Kelra had sat him down and explained breakfast was over 2 hours earlier, and got him some tea. Belder was already out on the range with the other girls and would see him tonight. There had been some snickering at that remark, but as Liam gulped down his tea, he discovered 2 things he didn't care for. The first was that he was being judged. Kelra was fairly obvious about it. The old shill was gruff but polite. The second was that the others... well, it wasn't disapproval, but it felt like they didn't know what to make of him either. Groggy as he was, he got it. Belle's family were ranchers, and he was a human. A city kid. One that wouldn't even be able to give Belle children. He wasn't just a stranger to them. He was strange. The whole exotic human thing wasn't fun and exotic. It was probably useless. The women were up around dawn and out with the herd, while the men took care of things around the ranch. Okay, if being out on the range on day 1 was Belle's idea of a vacation, that was a thing, but it wasn't a big thing. As he got the mug of tea down, he'd found out that the men were all prepping lunch. Apparently that started right after breakfast, where it would be hauled out to the Wranglers and the pair of galley trucks parked just outside. With hot tea and a cold papaya inside him, Liam Klassen did the one thing he knew how to do. He pitched in. That had been hours ago, and after helping clean the kitchen and load the galley trucks, he made it out on the range. Seeing Bell working the herd had been something. Herding Turok seemed to be half done on the snarling riding velociraptors called Rigoi, and half from oversized armored jeeps, and it had kind of tickled him to see her wave as she'd ridden in. She'd taken the lunch he'd offered and settled in to wolf it down with the other ranch hands, who'd given him looks from their table, and he could hear a lot of laughter. Something to find out about tonight. It wasn't like there was a time for a leisurely meal. He travelled out with a Shovanti guy named Gurudin, who might as well be mute, and a chatty Rakiri named Kurlek, and found out serving lunch meant pushing the food out while the women rotated guard duty, tearing down the table, and getting out as fast as you could. That part he got right away. Trust me, Lima. Kurlek's drawl was such that Liam had to listen carefully to catch around half what the man said. You don't linger with food out on the range when there are Grinshore around. Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom had a lot to say about them. Levi McClendon glowered at the stage. Sure as, well, it was all on display up there. The whole night was just strange, but Indasari was like Brelak on speed, and seemed to be everywhere at once, waving at cooing nobles for half a second before moving on to the next batch, and that had just been getting to the damn table. Getting his ass pinched twice just to sit down was not putting him in a good mood. After that, it had been Tom Warwick. Nice guy, dad's age, but their table turned out to be right next to some older Shovanti guy, and before anyone knew what was what, their big table with a view turned into a bigger table with the old guy picking up the tab. Naturally, Eli was making the most of it from the second they walked in. All it took was some women pressing an emerald into his hand along with her Omni number, and damn if he wasn't off. The only odd part was that he didn't really stand out. Levi caught his father's expression as Eli strutted along in full rooster mode, but neither said anything. As usual. There just didn't seem to be any point, and it had only ruined the mood. The food did look interesting. A lot of things around him smelled good, and it was just one night out. Just eat dinner and go home. Of course, the floor show wasn't helping. The dancers spaced out on stage between Shovanti strongwomen seemed to offer a man of every major species, including a human guy. They wore, well, it might be leather, and their chests were technically covered, but if their pants were any tighter, they'd have to be sprayed on. Melody has sat him down to watch Cirque du Soleil videos, and these guys were that good, but it was just hard to watch when... Hey, I'm gonna check this place out. Eli was already up and on the move without looking back. Don't worry, I'll be safe. Levi looked over at his dad, who shook his head. His father was probably right. It was a restaurant. Hannah would call it a cabaret or something fancy. Maybe a really huge cabaret, and he didn't want to think about the extras. But it was still a restaurant. Long way from the Garden of Eden. Levi divvied over going after Eli, but how many times had he been in a similar position before? It never went well, and as Eli loved to point out, Levi was not the boss of him. This is a restaurant, just a restaurant, a restaurant. Sign. He shook his head and looked to the stage as a new act came on. A familiar sound cracked through the air as he felt the blood drain from his face. Wow, isn't that a bit, I don't know, degrading to men? What do you mean? Budin frowned, glancing at the foursome in the spotlight. He's the one with the whip. As a floor manager in operations, Jalissa Tandala had nothing to do with the tide pool. Well, not as such. Ops always mixed in with cover, and it was a good thing, but this many drunken nobles were wanting to impress each other? Waiting tables barely counted as intel gathering. Still, there were side benefits, and this looked like fun. From her desk in security, she watched her target leave her table. That was her opening, and she made for the door in a hurry. "Have the guys on standby to cover the exits. I'm going in." Hannah McClendon was in a mood. Of all the places, in all the dives in all the galaxy, she had to get dragged into this one. Not that it wasn't impressive. She'd never seen anything like the Thai pool, and the, offerings on the side menu were, well, they just were. There were plenty of things they didn't cover in Sunday school, but she was 18 now. Of all the places she could be, she was on Shill. This was amazing. The culture, the architecture. There were technological breakthroughs on store shelves here that would take decades to reach Earth. There was tech for breakfast, tech for lunch, and tech for dinner, with tech for dessert. And there it was. This. To be fair, it was kind of amazing, but it just wasn't the part of Shill that she wanted to see. Cripes. I'd rather see what's going on behind the scenes than what's on stage. This planet is like a toy store. I want to see a computer shop, not some palace. And definitely not some Shilvanti nookie factory. At least Mum was enjoying herself, and the food menu had things she'd never heard of. It would be alright. And her in-laws were having fun. It was just one night out. But it wasn't fair. Sure, he could sell, but Eli had been handed a job pushing tech he didn't begin to understand, and she was... what? Along for the ride? McClendon Farms resident tech gopher. Second class, reporting for duty? The family business was a success, and they did need her, but it always felt like her father, Levi, Mel, and Reed's doing. It's not like you're suffering, hun. Though she did need to find a bathroom. It wasn't pressing, but the ride here had been longer than she expected, and this place was like a stadium. It was about 4 stories deep down to the theatre floor. The theatre has 6 floors looking over the stage, which left the floors above for... Hannah pressed through another crowd of giggling women, wearing more gold than a bank vault, and tried not to think about any of it. Sure, she'd been thinking about university, or maybe even joining the Navy. All that tech, the training, a full ride, most of all, seeing the galaxy. Even screwy as it was, this place was an experience. The girls back home will never believe me. As if that was any big deal. Most of them wanted to chase boys, go to school, get started with their life, and while that wasn't bad, they hadn't grown up with Shilvanti for in-laws. She learned things growing up they didn't even think about. There were times when her peer group felt more like the aliens. Girls like Chloe took off for the city, but there was a whole galaxy now, if you could make it off Earth. They thought too small and had small dreams. They... Running across the lobby, a figure dressed in electric yellow caught her eye. It took maybe a second to register the skin tone, and another to spot the crowd of women swarming after him. The bathroom would have to wait. Fucking Eli! Of course he's here! Idiot! Hannah gritted her teeth, and changed course. Gopher girl to the rescue. Solana Dasari stared out the window and sighed. Cassandra and Joshua were asleep. Largos was playing a game on his Omnipad. The sun was down and the stars were out, but it was basically just a cold black view out to the horizon, sort of like her future. Earth was home now, and if you played it cool, you had more fun in a month than some women saw in a lifetime. But her mother was giving her looks, and Trixis had been all over her since the start of the trip. All that talk about settling down, getting a career and a husband. They just didn't get it. Well, mostly. It was hard not to look around the Pelavon's place and not see her sister's point. Even in the settlements, it would be years before Earth had all this. The military wasn't for her, but she could sign up for the civil service. That was the Dasari way. Mostly. House Dasari had won its elevation through her great-co-grandmother, but it had kept it mostly through good works. Nothing spectacular, but stable. Boring.
At least until we got to Earth.
She'd been a kid when they were last on Shill and seen it with fresh eyes.
What do I want?
Running around with Eli McClendon was fun. Sometimes ended up being a hell of a lot of fun. But what was he now? He sold farm equipment, drank a little too much, and while the sex was great...
Well, the sex is great.
No.
Well, the sex is great.
Solana stared at her reflection in the window.
Face it, you're just pissed off they left you behind.
That was it. It was just a mood. Tomorrow this wouldn't even be a memory. Hannah ignored the glares as she pushed through the crowd, working her way toward Eli. No doubt about it, a throng of women was following him with all the subtlety of a school of sharks, and across the room she could see the big doofus was trying to look coy. Eli did coy like someone trying to smile, instead of throwing up. Some atrophied shred of his survival instinct must be kicking in. She caught a glimpse of him slipping into a corridor before she was cut off by a crowd of waiters pushing past. Spotting an opening, she nearly made it when another waiter blocked her way. She bounced up on her feet to look, but Eli and the posse after him were already gone.
This is ridiculous. I need a bathroom and...
Oh, hey there. I was wondering, are you a real human?
What is it with Shilvanti and bathrooms?
Hannah closed her eyes for a moment. Counting to 3, she turned around, ready to face off whatever gaudy...
Hi, my name's Jalissa.
The smiling Shilvanti offering to bump fists was maybe a year or two older, and instead of being decked out in gold, crepe, latex, whatever, she wore a sharp black skirt, well-cut blouse, and a long black jacket.
If you have a couple of minutes, my employer is looking for someone just like you.
Me? Here? Seriously? Hannah waved a hand at the crush of people pushing past.
Look, it's nice to meet you, but I really have to find someone.
The woman grinned, then shrugged.
Well, you're in the perfect place, but, you know, maybe after.
What? Not that kind of someone. Hannah felt herself starting to blush, though she wasn't sure why. It was ridiculous. She was in the biggest brothel anybody ever imagined, and now she was embarrassed?
I saw someone I know, but it's amazing here. Let's start over. Give me 5 minutes of your time and I'll help you look. You never know. It could change your whole life.
Jalissa smiled and cocked her head.
What have you got to lose?
Hannah looked in the maze of corridors, while her first thoughts weighed her odds of finding the wayward horny toad by herself.
Fine. 5 minutes.
The first rule of Fuck Club was to make sure everyone understood the rules of Fuck Club. Eli cursed under his breath as he ducked around another corner in the labyrinth of hallways and stairs. He should have realized what was happening before it spun out of control. He'd gone sloppy. On Earth, he usually had a girl or two who knew how things worked to show newbies the ropes. They never really believed the myth of human stamina, but it only took once to make a true believer. Everyone got a turn, waited their turn, and did it patiently. And if they didn't like it, they could go fuck themselves by themselves. Rounding another corner, he peeked back the way he had come. 3 Shilvanti women, 2 of which looked old enough to have kids of their own, were still headed his way. They looked a little dishevelled, but were trading glares, and still trying to outpace each other in what could best be described as speedwalking. Fucking nobles. Glancing around, he spotted a door with something he couldn't read flowing across the face of it. He peered at it a moment before making his choice. If it was locked, it wouldn't matter anyway. The door opened soundlessly, and he slipped inside and shut it, wincing as the latch clicked. Pressing his ear to the door, he held his breath as heavy footfalls approached on the carpeted floor outside. Closer, closer, and then they were past and moving away. He closed his eyes and breathed a sigh of relief, leaning back against the door.
Are you okay, sir?
Eli's eyes snapped open. The room he was standing in was fairly small, and looked like it served as a locker room of some kind. The room beyond, however, looked almost like a barber shop, with vanities lining the walls. Seated in the chairs and milling around were nearly 24 alien women in various states of undress. Shit. The Shovanti girl nearest him, with tasseled gold pasties and arms that belonged on an Olympic gymnast, exchanged a worried glance with the naked shark thing beside her.
I don't think I caught that, sir. Would you like us to call security for you?
Eli's hand was on the doorknob, but the thought of running into the mob of ill-mannered suitors gave him pause.
Calm down. You got this. It'll be fine.
Eli put on his best smile and straightened the collar of his thing. No need, ladies. Just looking for the floor manager. He strode purposely forward, sending a wink in the direction of the largest woman in the room, and the second largest. Best of luck on stage. He was through the room before anyone had the chance to react. He flung the far door open and dashed forward, then stopped short. He'd been backstage in a theatre before when he played Monsieur Thénardier, the innkeeper in their high school's adaptation of Les Miserables. This was definitely a backstage kind of place, all in black, with ropes and cables rising into the darkness overhead. There was only one stage that he could think of in this building, and he definitely did not want to be anywhere near it. Turning on his heels, he lunged for the door that was still closing behind him. His hand closed on empty air, and he had time to squeeze his eyes shut before it connected with his face. When his vision swam slowly back into focus, he found himself gazing up into a pair of familiar golden tassels. Shit.
Mom and Dad didn't raise no fool.
Hannah frowned at her second thoughts.
Well, they didn't raise two.
Hannah gave Jalissa her 5 minutes. After all, finding a guy dressed as a lemon shouldn't be hard, but the place was huge, with the plenty of twisty corridors and rooms she didn't want to go in by accident. 5 minutes turned to 10, then more, though in fairness Jalissa had helped her find a bathroom.
She wants me to be some kind of spy.
On that, her thoughts were in full agreement. And how cool was that? Okay, not what she'd expected in a bordello, but she hadn't expected to be in one of those either, and some of the floor show had been interesting. But still, the whole thing was weird and cool. No matter what, someone thought she was worth checking out. How could anyone not listen?
So, I get to live and chill for 2 years, expenses paid.
Hannah started ticking points off her fingers, as the Shovanti girl nodded, a slight cant to her head as she listened.
Full training, with a salary, for me to learn applicable skills that you won't talk about, for an organization you won't name.
Mm-hmm, Jalissa smiled, and Hannah felt a pang of envy, particularly for her jacket. Farm girls didn't get to look that cool.
I mean, we have to be discreet, but you've got the idea.
When you grew up on a farm with dirty blonde hair, you didn't dream of being the princess in a story. Fairy tales were for the girls with perfect golden curls who knew how to fly an air car, not girls who stacked hay in the barn and learned to drive their brother's antique pickup. When you grew up dirt poor, it shaped your expectations. Even when your parents got money, you were still the milkmaid, not the princess. The servant, not the queen.
Right, and I get to live on Earth after training? Almost certainly. Most of our operations are here, but we have branches on every major world except Earth. Our management is very forward-thinking, though.
Jalissa gave her a sympathetic wince.
You'd be amazed at all the conflicting news we get about your planet.
Not as much as you think, Hannah's first thoughts insisted.
So, things like analysis and gathering, with applicable skills.
Hannah cocked her head to match Jalissa's.
I get a salary, full medical, transportation fees, locality pay, and hazard pay. If I decide to retire, I'm under a non-disclosure, but I get a yearly stipend and placed into a field of my choice. Or we can help you find a husband.
Hannah's thoughts boggled.
Pass on that. The point is, we're very concerned with loyalty.
Jalissa bobbed her head lightly, and Hannah sucked her teeth in envy. The older girl's hair was jet black, but perfectly styled. She was almost as envious as she was flattered.
You said... So I just have to pass an aptitude test to join?
Hannah nodded slowly, looking down at the floor and trying to ignore the coat.
And you aren't criminals? We have a remit and funding from portions of the government. We're not criminals. She nodded firmly. The test's an evaluation to see if you're committed. We need to protect ourselves, and every recruit is an investment. Anyway, here's my contact number. It's a burner, so if I hear from you, we'll set something up, and if I don't, it's been nice to meet you. Right. Thanks.
Hannah looked at the printed card and tucked it away, suppressing a fresh wave of coat envy. Her first thoughts had been playing out a future as an interstellar super spy in Jalissa's black jacket, but her second thoughts reminded her it was a fantasy. Girls like her just did the chores and got things done.
I appreciate your interest. Now, about my brother. You said you could help me find him?
Jalissa held up a hand and touched a fingertip to the side of her jaw. Hannah couldn't see an earbud, but at this point that figured.
Found him while we were talking. The staff doctor said he's fine and getting some rest. Doofus or not, he's still my brother.
Crossing her arms, Hannah felt a surge of irritation that had nothing to do with Jalissa's jacket.
Oh, and exactly how are you sure he's fine if he needed a doctor? Standard procedure on the premises to avoid liability.
Jalissa gave her a long look that transcended worlds,
but the doctor said he tried looking down her top. Doofus.
Hannah exhaled slowly.
Yeah, he's fine. We still need to know what to do with him. Which of your parents should we inform?
After a moment, Hannah remembered to close her mouth.
I'm sorry, what? The floor manager's asking.
Her second thoughts replaced the high-def movie of her life as a super spy with a scratchy stock reel of cleaning up after Eli's messes. All the time she'd seen her father shake his head when he thought no one was looking, or the worry in her mother's eyes. Parents weren't infallible, but still.
Both. Tell her both.
Hannah uncrossed her arms and her stomach rumbled.
This is not me saying yes to anything, but is there somewhere we can get something to eat? I'm starving. And the floor show. Don't forget the floor show, said her second thoughts. Shut up. Let's go. I could eat a Turox.
Jalissa grinned and thumbed over her shoulder.
Great job, but weird hours. And where did you get that jacket?
Priscilla Tassane had slept like the dead and missed her alarm, but the bright summer sunshine of Willis spilling through her bedroom window eventually moved over her face, rousing her. She was still groggy, but forced herself out of bed. It took a few minutes to root through her bags, pull on some fresh clothes, brush out her short black hair, and clean her tusks. Satisfied, she wandered out into the house. In the light of day, she could see just how big the Sasana family ranch was. There were outbuildings all around, and she could see figures off in the distance by the fence line. The house itself was quiet, and she moved downstairs, looking for someone. No one. She huffed once, frustrated with herself for not setting her alarm, but this wasn't just a house. It was a working business, and people had things to do. Sooner or later they'd come home. In the meantime, there wasn't much to do but look around.
Belle's family home.
Keeping away from the private rooms upstairs, she found the kitchen and snaffled some leftover papayas. There was a note from Liam that they'd be back later, which confirmed her suspicions. It was a nice gesture, and she wolfed down breakfast, careful not to leave a mess. Wandering into the great hall, she looked over the pictures lining the huge leather great couch, and grinned at the sight of a young Belder on a baby Regoy. She looked about 7, with wild tousled hair, and a beaming grin aimed at the camera. Belle had mentioned sisters, cousins, and ranch hands. The Sasana ranch seemed to boast nearly 100 working women and 7 men, mostly Shovanti, but a fair number of Rakiri too. Prize medallions crowded shelves beside a riot of photos showing family and Turoks on the plane. Quiet as a tomb, the house screamed of boisterous, vibrant life, waiting for its owners to return. Strolling from room to room, she looked at the knickknacks and keepsakes, trying to imagine growing up somewhere so different from the big cities of Atherton, all of which brought her to a room she understood. An office was an office, and she knew those very well. There was an office for her mother, and 2 for her co-mothers. Each room spoke to the personality of their owners as city official, magistrate, retired, and barrister before the court. You could tell a lot about a person by their desk, how clean or cluttered, if it was new furniture or a loved antique. Not working offices in some corporate building with assigned furniture, but real offices, where the owner's work was their passion. Pris looked over the carved wooden desk with its granite top, and looked over the picture perched on one side. She recognized Belle there with 3 other girls, along with a smiling man hugging them tight. Her eyes fell across the open letter beside the desk omni. Letter of early foreclosure. It didn't make any sense. The Sasana ranch was huge. The buildings, the people, the endless Turoks she'd seen on the drive-in, when she hadn't been looking at Liam. The Turoks market was in constant, insatiable demand to feed one of the most populous worlds in the galaxy. Even she knew there was never a bad time for Turoks. Sure was only 3 days, and refrigerated cargo ships were constantly moving to fill the demand. You couldn't go broke if you tried. Sitting down, she started to read. 20 minutes was all she needed. She shook her head and pushed back from the desk, careful to leave everything just as she'd found it. This was a vacation, after all. As usual, her mothers were always right. Thank the goddess I packed 2 business suits. Zachariah was familiar with the big silence. He cleaned up his act thanks to Jen, but their life together hadn't always been what you'd call easy, particularly early on. He made some mistakes, and with not much to show besides a small farm and a hardscrabble life, he never considered himself much of a catch. Somehow Jen saw past that, but there'd been times when he'd fallen short. Not enough to lose her, but there'd be plenty of hard talks and harder truths. He knew the calm before the storm. He hadn't been much for the show, but the meal was darn good, even if he didn't know what he was having. Burdine and that Jama fellow got on like a house afire. Brelak had loosened up, and he pretty much spent time with Tom Warwick figuring out what they were eating. Levi was quiet, but that was his way. And Eli? Well, he'd been about to go looking when a manager called him to their clinic. That hadn't been the plan. Meeting Jen there hadn't either. After packing off Eli with the rest of the kids, well, there weren't any dogs on Shill, but he figured he might be constructing the first doghouse to grace Shill himself. If the autocap home was any indication, it might be a mansion. As soon as they got back, Budin waved a hand in the air with a like a flat tire and made himself scarce. Just him, Brelak, and 5 upset women. It didn't seem fair, but Zachariah licked his lips and... Just what do the 4 of you think you were doing? Brelak threw up his arms. I go out for 1 evening, only to find you in a club for picking up men? Phrysis stepped forward and wrung her hands. But you were... I had an invitation to a private meal, paid for by another man in the company of men, and a male waiter who wasn't even Shilvanti, at one of the best restaurants in the galaxy. But you? No, I don't want to hear it. Brelak flounced once and spun on his heels. I'm tired. I'm going to bed, and you can think about what to say for yourselves in the morning. Zachariah stood aside as the Dasari woman muttered and shuffled off to their bedrooms. There was enough embarrassment to spread around, but still. Jennifer cocked her head to one side, her arms crossed. Zachariah put on his best serious face. How could you do this to me, you craven hussy? Jennifer's eyebrow rose, but she said nothing. Finding some cute alien to spirit you away across the galaxy? Fighting the smile down was harder than expected, but he pressed on. It's because they're purple, ain't it? That was always your favourite colour. Zachariah Joseph McClendon. The smile she'd been suppressing finally broke free. You are absolutely terrible.
You know that?
As an evening out, Tom had to say it could have been worse. Running into Jama at the next table had been one of those twists of fate, like meeting someone you knew on the street. It was the tide pool and it was Jama. When you thought about it, it just figured. After that, everyone went their separate ways. Jama went back to his dinner with a cheeky grin, but it wasn't like Tom could stay, not with someone calling from a clinic. His Vatico and English was better than the McClendons, and Bodine in a crisis was a dubious proposition, so after a hasty farewell he tagged along to offer his support. Running straight into Miv, Leia and Lani wasn't so much a twist of fate as a gut-wrenching train wreck. Miv took his left hand while Leia took his right. Lani had chatted quietly with Miara Dasari, while Jennifer McClendon had a few words with the doctor, a Shulvanti woman still on the young side of middle age. There wasn't anything to be said at that point. The whole matter of what Eli McClendon had got himself into? Well, the management wasn't saying a word, and he'd only gotten a lump on his forehead. The nurse had shaken his head once, but all was forgiven, as far as the typal was concerned. No harm done. These things happened. Tom Warwick looked at Eli McClendon and wasn't so sure. The kid had as much sense as a sack of wet peat moss, and after tossing the ice pack aside, he tried on a grin. Eli McClendon had no idea how to read the room. Tom felt profoundly embarrassed for Jen and Zack, but kept it off his face when they parted ways, turning his night into an awkward ride home. Quirky and kinky as it was, the typal seemed to be all things to all species, and he had to admit it was a sight to see. Not that it mattered. As their autocab sped toward the academy, Tom tried to find the right words. It hadn't been his mess or their mess, but it was still a mess. His ladies were facing him, with Miv in the middle as their appointed matriarch. Judge, jury, and executioner. Tom swallowed as he met their eyes. Lani looked mortified, while Leia sat appraising him. Miv, well, it seemed best to get this over with. Miv,
Tom, no.
Miv shook her head sadly.
We have to talk about this, but we want to start.
Tom swallowed again, but nodded. All right.
We know this is bad.
Leia nodded primly. Tom felt his heart sink under her look, though seeing Solani's lip tremble broke his heart.
It's just... I heard...
Lani choked out the words. It didn't matter how big she was or how strong. Some things cut right to the heart, and Tom knew this had to feel like a betrayal.
Were you all heard?
Mavere reached over to rest a hand on Solani's.
And we want to know, who is she?
What? Tom had to remind himself to close his mouth again. She? She who?
We wanted to be enough for you.
Leia sniffed and looked away.
We understand you're human, but you could have waited until you married Lani.
Exactly. If you want to fourth already, well, we can deal with this like adults. Miv lifted her chin.
We heard you met someone for dinner, so we want to know who she is.
A fourth? Tom didn't like his mouth hanging open, and he licked his lips. Miv, I met with Jama. We ran into him, and he asked us to join him for dinner.
Jama?
Miv asked flatly.
Jama Ramirez.
Exactly. Well, it was sort of Badin's idea to go there, but I ran straight into Jama, and he's the one who paid for dinner. Tom shook his head rapidly. There weren't any women.
You're telling me you went to dinner and met up with Jama Ramirez, the most notorious flirt in the Imperium, and it was a coincidence with no women at all?
Tom looked at his two wives and his lady-to-be, with all the confidence of a man hang-gliding over hell. Yes.
And he's the one who paid for your dinner?
Miv canted her head.
That old reprobate who strung along every woman over 30 he's ever met?
Yes.
Not some duchess. Not some fangirl.
Mavere looked at him imploringly.
Please, we just want you to be honest with us.
No, I swear, it was all perfectly innocent. We went out and ran into Jama. Mavere closed her eyes as the trio deflated.
Oh, thank the goddess.